Hey, welcome to Tim's Vinyl Confessions. Once again, I'm Tim Derling. Thank you for tuning in. This episode is a special episode because it's on a band that's coming to this area very, very soon. They're going to be playing in Moncton at Casino NB Saturday, August 27th. And Casino NB is a great venue to see bands, especially a band like Loverboy. I've never seen Loverboy in concert, actually. I had tickets to see them back in '96. That show got canceled. And they're a band that, as far as rock bands are concerned, I've been into them for a long time. Probably about the same amount of time I've been into bands like Journey, REO Speedwagon, Bryan Adams. They're just one of those great radio rock bands. The difference with Loverboy is that, unlike, say, Journey or Foreigner or REO, I remember being very, very surprised when I found out that Loverboy were Canadian, because American radio played them all the time. I had no idea. I was so proud to find out these guys are from Vancouver. And they just had a lot of hits, and they hit in the States, unlike some Canadian acts, which sadly just have a really, really hard time cracking that north of the border. Loverboy cracked early, and they stayed there for a long, long time. They had a lot of success. And remarkably, in 2016, they're pretty much the same lineup that they were when they started in the late 70s. Aside from, of course, one tragic exception to that, bassist Scott Smith, who died in 2000. But we'll get into the lineup. Whatever lineup changes there were, I'll get into them as I go through the albums. I haven't got a lot of vinyl. It's mostly CDs, and one little sort of extra thing I'm going to throw in on the end. So this is the Loverboy edition of Tim's Vinyl Confessions. Now, the members of Loverboy came up on the circuit throughout Canada, I guess throughout the 70s. And a lot of these guys were veterans and had been at it for a long, long time. Guitarist Paul Dean and drummer Matt Furnett, I think it was those two, were in the band Streetheart, which was a band that came out of the late 70s into the early 80s, and they were one of those Canadian bands, much like Prism and a bunch of other bands that just never quite cracked the U.S. market, although they came close. And their bass player was a guy named Spider, or Ken Spider. I don't know if I'm saying his name yet right or not. Sinav. I've never been sure how to pronounce his last name, but he was the bass player of Streetheart, and that comes into the Loverboy story later. And 1980, Loverboy forms with a singer. Paul Dean teams up with a singer named Mike Renoski, who better known as Mike Reno to most people. Mike Renoski was the singer on one album by a Canadian band called not Tease. What were they called? They were called Moxie. That was it. I almost had to stop. Moxie. Now, I don't know much about this band, but he sang on one of their albums. So, again, another Canadian band that never quite cracked. But, so, Paul Dean, Mike Reno, keyboard player Doug Johnson, bassist Scott Smith, drummer Matt Furnett formed Loverboy. They got signed to Columbia Records, and in 1980, they released this album. This is an iconic album cover as far as 80s rock album covers go. This is the self-titled debut album from Loverboy. I think when they first came out, if I read this correctly, a lot of people thought that this person here, this individual, was one person and they were called Loverboy. That's actually not one of the members of the band. That's actually a woman. She was the photographer that did the album art, and the fact that you see the typewritten, these are typewritten lyrics from some of the songs on this album. This was kind of a mistake, but they thought it looked cool, so it got left in. And this is the first Loverboy album on Columbia CBS Records. As you can see, if you don't already know, they loved their red leather, and in this case, also a little bit of yellow leather. This is a Canadian edition of the first album. Now, what is significant about this album, very, very significant to rock fans in any country, I'll hold this up here. Producer, or production, Bruce Fairburn. Engineer, Bob Rock. Do you recognize those two names? That was the Dream Team in the 1980s. Slippery When Wet, New Jersey. Permanent Vacation. These guys became very, very in-demand producers, and they started out, of course, being Canadian boys producing Canadian bands. They actually worked with Prism before this. They worked with the Payolas, which was, not the Payolas, Rock and Hide, but that was Bob Rock's band, which was the Payolas. Honeymoon Suite, they produced the Big Prize album. One story has it that the Big Prize influenced John Bon Jovi to used them for the Slippery When Wet album, which was that sound that propelled them into the big leagues. I mean, it was the songs, but it was also the way it was presented, how it sounded on the radio. That big, big, big sound, and it's like sort of set the template for me at how I like my rock music to sound, with the big drums and the big choruses and the big loud guitars with mix of keyboards. It was just all very. This is where it came together on this first Loverboy album. We'll take a look at the vinyl itself. And actually, another story has it that Mike Reno claims that John Bon Jovi asked him for Bruce Fairbairn's number. So who knows what actually happened. So this is what the record looks like. Typical Columbia label. And so that's one of the vinyl I have. But I also have, of course, on CD. Now this is an older CD that I have. This is a Canadian edition of Loverboy's first album. That's the old CBS, I call it the box-looking format that they used for reissues of older CDs. Not reissues, but just issues of CDs. I've got a few others like this on my Cheap Trick episode, and also my REO Speedwagon episode, where I go through mostly CDs. You can see examples of that sort of very bland-looking, boxy type. If you had bought this in the States, for instance, I'm pretty sure that what you'd be seeing on the back cover is what was on the back cover of the record, the band photos along the top. But now I kind of think it's quaint, and I'm kind of a collector of these early CDs, and they had a very distinctive look. That's what the disc itself looked like. Nothing really fancy there, and nothing really inside of it either. Just the song titles and just the basic information. So that was the first album. Next one, 1981. This was the first album. Was very, very successful for many, many years. That was the most successful debut album by a Canadian act in Canada. I think it sold something like 6 million copies. It was a huge album. And this one, if it didn't do better, it did almost as well. On almost as iconic an album cover. That's this Get Lucky from 1981, the famous red leather pants. And this is a US edition, back cover. A shot of the band. This is, like I said, a US CD. This album contained, of course, Working for the Weekend, When It's Over, Lucky Ones. It was a big, big, big album, and they opened for Journey on the Escape Tour, a band that was at their peak at the time. So it was a good time for that sort of radio-friendly rock music at the time. That's what the CD looks like. Can't really see too much. It's just a typical CBS disc. There's a little bit more happening inside here, but not much. Just a little bit of credits. Again, this album was produced by Bruce Fairbairn and Bob Rock, and that was really worth printing the extra paper, wasn't it? So the third Loverboy album came out in 1983, and it's the other vinyl I have to show you. It's called Keep It Up. This is a Canadian issue. Song titles on the back. Hit songs off this one included Hot Girls in Love, and also a song called Queen of the Broken Hearts. So, now inside this record there's actually something more than was inside the CD. I think I went over this record when I went over my Cheapies Bin one a few episodes ago. So we've got a sheet here that has all the lyrics to all the songs. For some reason it's in pink. And a lengthy interview with Paul Dean talking about basically the history of the band up to this point and the making of this album. And the record itself, again, usual Columbia label. Now the CD I have to Keep It Up. Bought this a long time ago. Now inside there's a ticket stub in here. This was given to me by co-worker of mine who actually saw them in concert on this tour, so he gave me a bunch of old ticket stubs. Thanks, Eric. I think I posted those all on this Facebook page at one time or another, but when I had the corresponding CD I put them in. So let's just take a look at this. So this is from oh, this is funny. Remember I said Loverboy were coming to Casino NB August 27th? Check this out. This ticket stub is from August 27th, 1983, Fort Wayne Memorial Coliseum in Indiana. Wow, the same date. That's crazy. Now, one thing I don't see on here, oh, yes I do. I think if you look at that, $11.50. That was the price of the ticket. Wow, the same date. That's unbelievable. This was not rehearsed. All right, so Okay, the CD to keep it up. So here's the booklet. Song title's printed on the back. Folded out. It's got all the lyrics. It doesn't have that interview with Paul Dean on it. And the back cover is just the front cover again. And the CD's different in that it doesn't say Columbia on it. It says CBS. Now, this is an old CD. And the way that I know that this is an old CD, I did buy it new, but I think it had been in the racks for quite a long time. And I don't have it anymore, so you got to take my word for it. But it came in a long box. I'll give you a second to Google long box, CD long boxes if you don't know what I'm talking about. But this is the one that I had that came in a long box. So next up, 1985, the fourth Loverboy album. And it's almost impossible for me to say the title of this album without getting the song in my head. Love it, every minute of it. It's probably in your head now, isn't it? This is the fourth Loverboy album. It's a black and white shot of the band. This is an American CD. This was the first Loverboy album to not be produced by Fairbairn and Rock. It was co-produced with Paul Dean and Tom Allom. Tom Allom was sort of better known as a British metal producer. I think he's primarily known for Judas Priest. He also produced Def Leppard's first album, On Through the Night, and one of my personal favorites, Y&T's In Rock We Trust album. Not a discernible difference in sound, but the production was definitely different. It definitely had a different feel to it. There's the disc itself, loving every minute of it. Of course, the title song became another big hit for Loverboy. The song Lovin' Every Minute of It was actually written by Robert John Mutt Lange. So with that in mind, if you go back and listen to Lovin' Every Minute of It, it sounds like it could have been a Def Leppard song with that logic. I can hear it. And it was another top 10 hit for them. So there's pictures of the group and lyrics and credits. Another big hit off of this album was the song This Could Be the Night, which is a power ballad, which is co-written by Jonathan Cain from Journey. And I've got another album to talk about that Jonathan Cain features on as well. Another song on this album, it was a single, but it wasn't a hit, was a song called Dangerous, which, like their earlier song Jump, was co-written by Bryan Adams and Jim Vallance, who, like Bruce Fairbairn and Bob Rock, got their start working with Prism. And those four names, Bruce Fairbairn, Bob Rock, Bryan Adams, Jim Vallance, they factor in heavily in the history of not only Canadian rock, but like melodic rock music in general. But the song Dangerous that Loverboy do on here is actually started out as a song called Reckless. And I didn't know that until I bought the 30th anniversary edition of Bryan Adams' hit album, Reckless. And it's got 7 extra tracks on it. Most of those tracks were recorded by other artists, but were written for the Reckless album. It's got Teacher Teacher, that 38 Special ended up doing. And I'll probably go into that if I do a Bryan Adams episode, because it's really cool. It's really good to pick up if you're a fan, and you just get the standard edition if you want to hear some extra stuff. But the song Reckless got changed, just the chorus, and the one word, Reckless, became Dangerous. Other than that, it's the same song, if that all makes any sense. Next up, not a CD you see very often. This is Wild Side. This is the 5th Loverboy album, and it came out in 1987, Columbia. Only real hit song off this was the first song, Notorious, which dented the top 40. And if it sounds a little Bon Jovi-esque, it's because it was co-written by John Bon Jovi and Richie Sambora. This also has another song that Bryan Adams had a hand in, a song called Hometown Hero. That's what the disc looks like. A little bit more inside this one. So it's got lyrics and credits, as usual, and picture of the group. That was the last new Loverboy album to come out for quite some time. They more or less sort of disbanded at this point, but they got back together in late '89 to record 3 new songs for, the inevitable Greatest Hits album. And it was called Big Ones. And this came out in late 1989 on Columbia. and remains actually a pretty good starting point if you're curious about getting into Loverboy. This is a Canadian Columbia House edition. You will notice that there are only 4 pictures. By this point, keyboard player Doug Johnson had left the group. He was the first one to leave, although he eventually comes back. This had 3 new songs on it: For You, Ain't Looking for Love, and a song called Too Hot, which actually dented the top 100. This album was also significant. It's the first time that a song called Heaven in Your Eyes appeared on a Loverboy disc, and that song was a hit single from the Top Gun soundtrack. And it's the first time it actually appeared on a Loverboy album here. And there's the disc itself. It's got the logo there. And inside the, not much inside of it. Just basically the song titles and, you know, the producers or whatever. So yeah, a long gap with no new Loverboy music. In 1994, Columbia Sony released an album called Loverboy Classics, which had a few different songs on it. It was another hits collection. It had a few different songs on it, and the major selling point for that, it wasn't enough to get me to buy it, was it actually recorded, it had a song that had another song that was a soundtrack song that had never appeared on a Loverboy album before. However, it was not a Loverboy song. It was the song Almost Paradise from the Footloose soundtrack. One of the many, many hits off that soundtrack, but that was a duet with Mike Reno, which is why it appears in a Loverboy album, and Ann Wilson from Heart. So, I don't know if that makes it a Loverboy song, but there it is. So, next up, you know, of course, grunge. You know, the thing is that with Loverboy, bands like Loverboy, they were actually sort of, their popularity sort of waned at the same time that bands like Bon Jovi and Def Leppard were gaining speed. But all of those bands, anything that was like remotely melodic and up-tempo and upbeat and, dare I say, fun, was sort of swept by the wayside when grunge took over. So a lot of these bands kind of sat a lot of these years out. Loverboy eventually did get back together and toured and came up with a new album in 1997 called Loverboy 6. Yeah, VI, that's 6. Very, very classic looking, simple cover, but it looks like a Loverboy album cover. This album came out on a label called CMC International Records, which had kind of picked up in the 90s and signed a lot of bands that had gone by the wayside popularity-wise. I know they had Warrant signed to them, Lynyrd Skynyrd. There were a bunch of bands that were on CMC International, and they released this one album by Loverboy. So here are the songs. Pretty good album. Had some good songs on it. One song on here called Create a Monster, the 7th track on here, actually appeared on a Paul Dean solo album previous to it being recorded with Loverboy. And so this is the disc itself, Loverboy 6. And at this point, it's the core members of the band. First of all, I'll show you this. Like, lyrics and credits. And they had a different keyboard player in this album, a guy named Richard Serra. This is the only release that he appears on. And this one was self-produced. Paul Dean, Mike Reno produced that. Of course, being on a small label and coming from the era they did, it didn't really do much of anything, but it does remain a good album if you can check it out and find it. Sony, of course, Sony Music, never let it be said they don't try to milk money out of their acts like any record label does. In 2001, this album came out. It's called Live, Loud, and Loose. This is the first ever Loverboy live album, and this comes from between like 1980 and 1986. So these are live performances, I think, from various years, and put together in one package. So we've got, you know, they played to some huge crowds, as you can see here. Liner notes inside here. I'll show you where they start. So there's a long write-up in here, and I believe, I don't want to say the name until I look at it for sure. Yeah, Nina Blackwood, who was one of the original MTV VJs. Remember I said Loverboy got played a lot in American radio? Well, their videos got a lot of video play on MTV as well. And also, they took time out, the members of the band in this album. Scott Smith, the bass player for Loverboy, died tragically in a boating accident. I don't think he was ever actually found in December of 2000. Very tragic. And when you think about it, a aside from Doug Johnson leaving for a few years and then coming back, which I think he had by this point, they didn't have any lineup changes, which for a band that had been around that long is quite something. So Scott Smith's permanent replacement was their old friend from Streetheart, Spider Snave, if I'm saying your name right, Spider. Okay. So that's been the band ever since. So remarkably little lineup changes, almost like Def Leppard in a sense. Very, very few lineup changes. So another 10 years will go by. So 1987, we had Wild Side, 97, Loverboy 6, and in 2007, another Loverboy album appeared, Just Getting Started. And this one appeared on their own label, I'm going to call it. I've never seen anything else on Rockstar Music. And this was a pretty good return to form, too. The last song on here, a song called Stranded, features background vocals from Phil Collen from Def Leppard, which is kind of cool. So here we go. There's the little bit of credits there. Not much else inside of here. The next thing that I've got, I mean, there's compilations. I didn't buy every one that came out. So the next thing that I've got is something, again, that Sony put out in 2009 called The Greatest Hits, The Real Thing. This is essentially a repackaging of that Loverboy Classics, but I bought this one because it actually has a couple of new songs on it. It's got a song called I'm Alive and one called The Real Thing. Wait a minute, let me do a little fact checking right there. Real Thing was off Just Getting Started, sorry, but I'm Alive was a brand new song. So this one, Big Ones was good. This has a few different songs on it. Like it's once again, Almost Paradise appears on here. Gangs in the Street is on here from Get Lucky, as is Jump, also from Get Lucky. And because Sony were so original, they used the same crowd shot that was on Live, Loud, and Loose on the inside the tray here. This is probably the easiest thing you might see, to pick up from Loverboy if you wanted to get one album by them. And there's write-ups on each of these songs. So it's kind of, I like reading these songs, or these write-ups on these songs. So this was worth having, And the next thing to come out from Loverboy came out in 2012. And like a lot of veteran melodic rock bands in this millennium, they were signed to Frontiers Records. And they signed a deal to do this, which is called Rock and Roll Revival, which is an apropos title for a lot of reasons. We'll go over exactly why. Now, what this album contains is 3 brand new songs, all of which are quite good, and the rest of these are re-records of older songs. Now, I got to say, the re-records rarely are as good as the originals. I understand why bands do it sometimes so that they can license those versions for commercial soundtracks or whatever, and they don't have to deal with the original, master recordings from the record label. So I get it. This is what the disc itself looks like, which is kind of cool. This album actually reunited them with Bob Rock. Of course, Bruce Fairbairn sadly passed away in 1999. So they didn't reissue the complete Dream Team, but it was pretty close. As a matter of fact, there's a picture of Bob Rock right there. Any Metallica fan knows who Bob Rock is. Motley Crue, certainly, as a producer, not just as an engineer. So we've got all the lyrics to all the songs, which is handy because most of the original albums did not contain lyrics. Interesting to note that Lovin' Every Minute of it is simply called Lovin' Every Minute on here. I don't know why, but there it is. And as far as I know, the most recent thing to come out from Loverboy came out a couple of years ago. This is called Unfinished Business, 74 to 14. This is 10 unreleased songs. Some of these were demos written for other albums. Red and Black, typical for Loverboy. Now, I will say this. There are some interesting songs on this album, and I can kind of see where a record label wouldn't have selected them. Particularly a really, really long song called War Bride, which is sort of an epic song. Doesn't really sound like anything that Loverboy would normally do, but it's good. I mean, there's some good stuff on here. It's interesting hearing these sort of songs that were lying around. Now, the only thing I will say is I wish that each of these songs, they had said, okay, this one was written for Keep It Up. This one was a demo from our first album. This one didn't make Lovin' every minute of it. I wish they'd have given a little bit more background to the origins of these songs, other than they were recorded sometime between, as they say in here, 1979 up to the present. And a lot of them do sound like demos, but it's interesting to hear. It's unreleased stuff, so I just wish I'd known more about each song. So that's my Loverboy collection. There is one more thing I want to show you. If you're a Loverboy fan, you're obviously a fan of Mike Reno's voice. Got a pretty distinctive voice. And another one of my favorite voices, Sammy Hagar. This is Sammy's 1982 album, Three Lock Box, which the vinyl I've gone over on the Sammy Hagar, Van Halen, David Lee Roth episode that I did a long time ago. But there's a song on here, track 3 on Three Lock Box, is called Remember the Heroes. That's actually a duet with Sammy Hagar and Mike Reno. Just a cool little fact. It's a cool song, and another link to another good band is that keyboards on that song were by, once again, Jonathan Cain from Journey, who also co-wrote This Could Be the Night. So there's kind of connections going on here. So August 27th, 2016, in Moncton, not Fort Wayne, CasinoNB.ca if you want to see about getting those tickets to see one of Canada's longest running melodic rock bands, Loverboy. Thanks for watching this edition of Tim's Vinyl Confessions.